better known as business intelligence. That's enough about me for now, and let's begin. So we're going to look at some history of business computing and computing intelligence in general. I did some work from 2000 to 2006 for a company called In-Q-Tel, which is the CIA's and now the intelligence community's venture investment firm. And so I learned something about how they use computers for intelligence gathering and in particular for analysis. So what is business intelligence? Actually, I've given this talk a few times, and when I introduced it to a more general audience, non-technical audience, the first question was, is that an oxymoron? Is it the competitive edge? It's always going to be the competitive edge next year, has been my experience since about 1984. So I thought I'd start right off with a pretty good example. This is from a current company, Binocle, that's in the upper left. And I give a URL at the end of these two slides if you're interested in following that up. They're a consulting firm that are able to produce dashboards like this, but I thought it was a pretty good example of what's been settled upon as the key elements. So you have accounts just like you would in any business report. You have of choices of what you want to look at. We're looking at the strategic goals report, but you have drop down. You can see the little arrow there. You can choose what time period you're looking at. So you start to see that this has a kind of a dimensionality to it, like the Excel pivot table. A stoplight report is a very common technique that's been used for probably 20 years or so. So when you look at the key performance indicators, the KPIs, this is KPIs by countries, the ones that are in trouble are in red, and the ones that are doing okay are in green, and you got yellow and orange to indicate the difference. Actually, this report shows a light green and a dark green, which is nice. And you have another dimension, which is the country. So you've got all of this information by time, by country, and by relevance. So multidimensionality is the characteristic that distinguishes BI, always has distinguished it. That was the key characteristic of our product, Strategem. It handled multidimensionality, multidimensional databases. So you can have three dimensions, accounts, time, and countries, and then as we just saw, we could have scenarios, or we could have different report choices. So there's your link for Binocle. I think that's how you pronounce it. So in the 60s and to the 80s, where I got started, it was called decision support. Shortly thereafter, while we were still working on it, just around the turn from 80s to 90s, there were systems called executive information systems. Pilot was one of those that had an edge. We're still, even though the PC has entered the picture, these are still mostly powered by mainframes and minis like the digital VAX. Online analytical processing, as a contrast to online transaction processing, OLTP, was a term that started to be bandied about in the 90s. And then business intelligence as a term to basically cover all of the above came into widespread use, wider use in the 90s. I believe it was a Gartner analyst who proposed it. However, I found that the term itself was first coined in 1958 by a IBM author, and he used it basically in the same sense that we use it now to cover all of the systems that could provide intelligence about your business. DSS originated in the 1960s, and this is basically giving you a prose recap of that schematic slide. And multidimensionality distinguishes DSS and OLAP in general from flat databases, which are two-dimensional. Howard Dresner from the Gartner group is the one who proposed business intelligence, not in the 90s, as I might have just said, but in 1989. So that's a scheme of how we got from there to here. And it was in the 1990s that was more widely. So here's one family tree of some parts of business intelligence. You see that it goes down to Oracle OLAP and Excel, which you can still acquire today. Everything else on this chart is gone. The National Bureau of Economic Research at MIT funded a project called TROLL, which stood for the OL in the middle of that stood for online. That was its characteristic that was so remarkable. That actually is still available from a company called Intex, and that was the mid-1960s. Out of that first came IRI. Actually, it was a company before that called Management Decision Systems, and they had a product called Express, and that was 1970. So they spun out of, they were a direct descendant of TROLL. VisiCalc came out of the Harvard Business School. Bob Franken did it as a project while he was still a master's, an MBA student there. And that was 1978 when it came out on the Apple II computer. My product called Stratagem came out in 1980, same origin as Express. I mean, literally, it had the same code base. 1, 2, 3, the first widely used spreadsheet, which was a better copy of VisiCalc. In fact, Lotus eventually acquired VisiCalc, just to eliminate any problems that there might be with intellectual property there a bit later when they were rolling in cash. That was 1983, right on the heels of the IBM PC, which was 1981. And of course, those were the grandparents and parents of Excel, which first came out in 1985, but the version that became popular was 1995, Excel 5. Oracle acquired Express and made it the basis of what's now called Oracle OLAP, although it's been rewritten. And Keenan Systems, which was later acquired by Lawson Technologies, acquired my product Stratagem in 1999, and that pretty much closes out the early history of business intelligence. Here's bringing us closer up to date. The most recent Magic Quadrant for Gartner is from 2012, and you'll see in the upper right, where everybody wants to be, IBM, Oracle, SAP, they acquired all the players, Business Objects, Cognos, and all the major players from the 80s and 90s, and they're still. SAS has been around forever. They're actually about as old as my product. One of the newest products that's in there is a product called ClickTech, which is interesting. It's all based in RAM-based processing. It doesn't use disk. The ones that are coming, the challengers, are mostly display. Spotfire, I have a little history with that. In-Q-Tel was an investor in Spotfire, and that was spun out of Ben Schneiderman's University of Maryland computer science program. And the ones that are coming up, the niche players, are mostly in what's called self-service BI. Let's just take it to the end user. And actually, I didn't check. I did this chart originally a year ago. I bet a lot of those, or some of those, are not even around anymore. JasperSoft, of course, is using the open source version. Another way to take a look at business intelligence, just to get your head around it, you have an old-fashioned paper report. This is just something I mocked up. And that's a two-dimensional report. And then when you add a dimension to it, say divisions, this is the same report for each division, you've got multidimensionality. Here's a little bit more of a way to view it. The star schema, you take each column from a two-dimensional relational table and make them into a dimension, and then you have what's left are measures, and that's known as the star schema. And then this is actually what a lot of star schemas wind up looking like, basically. Way too complicated. TMI, as they say, too much information. So that does seem complicated, and I've been told it's been complicated in all the years that I've been trying to sell this. How does a multidimensional analytics statistics-packed technology with all those star schemas become useful to the executives who want to use it for decision-making? Well, the most current trend, as I said, is self-service BI. So Horn and Hardart is dating me pretty significantly. They haven't been around for a while, but they were a self-service restaurant. So instead of having a report produced by an army from the IT department, we have this is the desirable again, the quadrant, the upper right's always where you want to go. The managed self-service BI is the holy grail, or is it Monty Python's holy grail? And I give you the link for those of you who get the, I don't expect you to write this down. For those of you who pick up this presentation, you can follow these links and get more about some of these references that I make. So self-service BI, the next holy grail, where did that come from? Well, BI and end-user computing have always, especially when executive information systems got introduced, in the, like I said, in the late 80s, they've always been associated, or they've been associated for a long time, since, you know, at least 1990. But then this notion of end-user computing started way before we might have guessed, certainly not before 1981 when the PC was introduced. Alan Kay introduced the term personal computer in the late 60s. In 1968, Doug Engelbart in Stanford University, who was being funded by the Defense Department, produced what has been since called the mother of all demos. In that demo, in 1968, he introduced the mouse, hypertext net meeting, which is a SharePoint-like capability, and a whole bunch of other stuff that obviously didn't become commonly used until the 80s, 90s, and even today. I actually have a video of this. You can see it on YouTube. You can see the whole thing. Actually, I think there's several. It's broken up into parts. It's actually very bad old video. But here he is using a mouse on a mainframe in 1968. A good book about this whole story is called What the Dormouse Said by, the author's name is Markov. And there's the YouTube link. So that's the mainframe computer that Engelbart used, and he used two of them because he actually was networking and communicating with another user. They were modifying the same file online in real time. And there's his mouse in the lower right-hand corner. It's wooden with a big ball in the bottom, but that was the first prototypical mouse. And there's Doug himself with his CRT. Using a CRT as a computer terminal in 1968 was not common. So who else was involved in this? A guy named Stuart Brand. This guy, he was better known for having produced the whole Earth catalog, but he hung around Stanford and Palo Alto and thought that this would be cool and got involved and actually produced and did the video for this mother of all demos. What Engelbart saw, and when he wrote his first grant to get money to do this kind of work, was the 1962 paper that Moore wrote on the predicted improvement in microprocessor density or transistor density on silicon. And here's from 1971, so almost 10 years after the paper, until 2011. Here's how it has grown exponentially. So from that mainframe computer to an iPhone, one current generation iPhone is as powerful as 15 of those mainframe computers, which Engelbart was actually using sort of like a desktop computer. So Stanford University, it's interesting. We kind of take it for granted. Stanford and Palo Alto and Silicon Valley is the place where innovation occurs. But in World War II, that wasn't the case. Fred Terman, that guy, was recruited out of Stanford to go to Harvard because the government thought that that's where all the smart people were, except for Fred. And they brought him to lead what was called the Harvard Radio Research Lab. Now, this is not the lab that eventually became Lincoln Labs out of MIT, which was also involved with radar and radio research. This had to do with basically the war in Europe with the Germans mostly, and it was basically electronic warfare, and it was only declassified fairly recently. So the Defense Department in World War II gave MIT $120 million, Caltech and Harvard many tens of millions of dollars, and Stanford $50,000. So Terman successfully led that experience. He had 800 people working for him. And then he moved back to Stanford. He took his top 11 guys and continued to get funding, mostly black ops, mostly from the intelligence community. And he never had to worry about it only being $50,000 again. And he started an entrepreneurial culture with the unique capabilities that they had. Not microprocessor, but microwave technology was centered in Stanford and with those 11 engineers. And he encouraged people, when they had a patentable idea, go out and found the company. William Shockley, who worked at Bell Labs, was one of the inventors of the transistor. He moved out there because to the same area because of this entrepreneurial spirit. He went to Caltech, and he was more famous for producing semiconductors, and they need silicon, and hence the name of the place became Silicon Valley. Basically Shockley could, even though he came after Terman, could be looked upon as the de facto father, because from him and from the 8 employees, the traitorous 8 who left his company and went to found Fairchild Semiconductor, and then from there Intel, most of Silicon Valley. So it was the government money and black ops money, intelligence money, trying to keep track of the Russians and what they were using with electronic intelligence. Guys like Stuart Brand, because of this culture, and they freely intermingled, and they produced the graphical, in 1968, in those days, the graphical user experience, the mouse, file sharing, computer-based collaboration. Basically, everything that Apple commercialized, and then Microsoft tried to copy. And he had, I'm sorry, I'm getting a call. 2 of his students were named Hewlett and Packard. Here's one of those fun maps of Silicon Valley. There's Stanford, just appeared. Here's HP. The whole Earth catalog is practically in Stanford's lap. And there's Intel, and there's a number of others, including where I worked, InQtel. So that's interesting. But how about the business intelligence? How did that fare? So you want to give the executives what they want, which is that, right? A dashboard, put it on fancy desktops, add a lot of technology to the mix, get to that self-service, holy grail. How are we doing there? This is updated for today's presentation, the most recent quotes, and the theme here is that we need to put the business in business intelligence because we're not doing it. And that we focus on technology versus solving business problems, thinking technology is a silver bullet. Over a third of BI projects fail to deliver on business objectives, and that's actually a fairly conservative estimate. You would assume from that 66% must succeed. Fewer than 30% of business intelligence projects meet the objectives of the business. So that's and that's actually a slightly older quote, but it ain't good. So there's a pie chart. I'm not sure you can see those colors. 2/3 fail. So when it comes to self-service business intelligence, it's an ongoing failure. 70% roughly, by my calculations, averaging these results. It's a boulevard of broken dreams, which is the name of this picture. It's a picture that was copied after a Hopper picture by a guy named Helen Wayne, where we got James Dean and Humphrey Bogart and Marilyn Monroe and Elvis Presley in a diner. There's also a song by Green Day, which I had in this presentation at one point. So from 1968 to 2013, we've got 45 years. We've been trying to put end-user computing into executive hands and to provide technological answers to basically business questions like, what's our profit by product? These are questions that I've actually tried to help people solve, sometimes successfully. So where is this price competition coming from in China? Actually, the answer to that question was ourselves. Our gray market products are finding their way into our competitors' hands in China. We're selling them too low, and we're not preventing their repurposing. Where are the most profitable products, and whether accounting for those in pharmaceuticals and in high-end cosmetics, where I've had some experience, and actually in consulting, which I've had a lot of experience. It's just a tiny fraction of customers are usually responsible for all the profit. And so first of all, who are they? And then are they carrying all the other products? Are they unprofitable? How can we measure them? And we continue to build these dashboards, balanced scorecards, and tell executives that that's what they want. And it reminds me of this 1957 movie, one of the best movies about technology, called it's a Tracy Hepburn flick. This entire movie, by the way, is on YouTube in, I think, about 10 parts. And he's going to bring in a computer, 1957, mind you, and that's what they thought computers looked like. See the lights in the background, and the tape drives, always tape drives. But this is the reaction that so this is what a 70% failure rate looks like graphically. How do you manage to continue to fail like that? So I got this from a guy named John Seeley Brown, who was on In-Q-Tel's board of directors, and he got it from somebody else. I attribute it at the end. But in 1869, this is one of the prettiest and fastest and most successful clipper ships, the Cutty Sark, which you've heard of. A three-masted clipper ship with a lot of sail on it, and it could cross the Pacific. It was reliable. It was fast. They knew how fast it was going to be able to do that. It was for the tea trade in general, the East Asian trade. So it was a success, and that was the way to go. And around that same time, sailing a steamship would have looked sort of like this. Now, 1850, this, and they actually didn't want to rely on the steam power because it wasn't reliable, and they would even take it across the Atlantic, never mind the Pacific. It was a coastal steamer. So from the beginning, it looked like sail was your better bet. But as we move along, now it's 1902, and here the Germans built this five-masted clipper ship, and as an attempt to continue, it's that's all we need is more sail. The France, two in this case, 1911, which is hard to believe. These are commercial ships being built, and not to be outdone, the Americans built this ship seven-masted. It was so unwieldy it sank basically from its own, couldn't get out of its own way. And ironically, it was carrying oil when it sank off the coast of England. So John Seeley Brown has a presentation. I think you can probably find the whole presentation online. He calls this Conceptual Ruts Reign Supreme. But the first time I saw all these clipper ships, and I remember being kind of fascinated by clipper ships when I was a teenager. Didn't realize they went well into the 20th century, or they attempted to. And meanwhile, of course, steam took over. So insanity is continuing to do the same thing and expecting different results, that this time this will surpass steam. And, of course, that's not where we went. Missing the next paradigm can be very costly. In fact, that Lawson was one of the most costly ships ever built, and then costly disasters because it sank way before its time. So what is the next paradigm? What are we missing? John Maynard Keynes' quote I like, "The difficulty lies not in grasping new ideas, but in escaping from the old ones," like that. And John Seeley Brown also presented this. I'm not sure if this is, I'm picking this up in the middle. You're instructed to follow the team with the white shirts and count how many times they're passing the basketball back and forth. And, of course, now we stop it. There's a gorilla that's walked into their midst. Over half the viewers of that video, and that whole thing is available at that link. I think it's also on YouTube. Did not see the gorilla. When I saw this in a room full of, I would think, about 150 to 200 people, one person saw the gorilla. So we're focusing on something else, and that's why we miss the obvious. So there's another example. In 1999, the CIA, who had actually, as I just pointed out, they were among the ones, the intelligence community was the ones who funded Fred Terman in the 50s and 60s, and they got Silicon Valley going. They got what they wanted out of it, which was basically electronic intelligence and radar control. They had realized by 1999, and Google was an example that we used a lot in the In-Q-Tel days, that they must be looking at the wrong thing too. And what had happened was they became reliant entirely on cleared technologists working inside the agency, and were no longer looking outside the agency for technology. And they decided to correct this. They created a company that would invest in the technology and get it way early compared to everybody else. They were not interested in making money on new technology. They were interested in getting in on the technology as it was born, and then, of course, guiding it. And actually, to sum up, I don't know how many of you know the history of In-Q-Tel. It's still around. It's still thriving. In-Q-Tel, the paradigmatic investment that both would then turned out to be somewhat of a commercial success, but it was exactly what the agency was looking for, and they've taken great advantage of it internally, is Google Earth. We found a company called Keyhole, whose market, they said, was the real estate business with this mapping software, but it was very flexible, and we made it more flexible. We instructed them how to make it more flexible so that the agency could put their own data on top of the maps. And when that was done and commercialized, because that was the model, Google was extremely interested in that, and they acquired that company, and it has since become Google Earth. So the history of BI is similar, where we're now at a point where 70 to 80%, and this is current, 2012, 2013, 78% now are failing. That's the graphical depiction. So we must be looking at the wrong thing. So what are we looking at? You know, we're inside the server room. We're looking at the IT department. We're looking at databases and delivery on the workstations, which is what we're familiar with. We're focusing on all the technical components of BI, and we love this stuff. I mean, I got to admit, the dashboard, the scorecard, the workstation, but that we're not going to get success by continuing to do what we've been doing over and over again just because we can. I copied this, the typical pattern of IT projects. First it starts with enthusiasm and goes right to disillusionment, panic and hysteria, search for the guilty, punishment of the innocent, and praise and honor for the non-participants. Actually, I looked up where did that come from. I mean, I've heard it for years and years. It applies more to BI projects than it does to most IT projects. Sad. So how do we go immediately from enthusiasm to disillusion? And that has happened. I actually worked hard on one BI project in the 90s and was very proud of it. And in that case, we showed it to the customer, and he just glanced at it and said that those numbers are wrong. Do you think he would ever go back and look at that again until we got them right? He didn't care what it looked like. He knew what the numbers had to be. And we did get it right, and he did look at it every day. So we love the user experience. We love this notion of modernizing technology. But the executives who actually can get their answer on a telephone, and they never actually asked to have a new user experience. And the CIO that I've worked with throughout my career, and I'm always trying to get him to do BI type things, and he actually supports intelligent use of business intelligence. But he says, I'm expensive. Everything you're doing is complicated. I don't understand why you need to do it. And then you're trying to get me to provide to my executive, to my bosses, something that they didn't ask for. So computer-based intelligence, just like any other source of intelligence, from the newspaper to the radio to the TV, has to provide its own value for the medium. So it has to be more immediate. It has to be social and interactive because that's what the medium can do, as opposed to you can't interact with the television or anything that went before. And we saw this when we worked with the agency, that if you're going to have systems and you're going to compete with what in those days they used to worry about, being preempted by what CNN was telling people, because they have people all over the place, just like the agency does in all kinds of foreign countries, telling the same consumers what's going on. You need to have something that's immediately available and accessible, which is a problem when you're dealing with intelligence. They don't want raw intelligence, and at least in those days they didn't, to be immediately available. So it was a real challenge to see how you're going to solve that problem. But we do have, I believe, there's hope here. This is not all pessimistic. We have the opportunity to provide that value, that immediate value, that current value, not yesterday's but today's, the last hour's data on devices that we don't have to convince the executive to use because they're already using them, and that would be smartphones and mobile BI. So putting the business into business intelligence, as one of those quotes, I think it was Forrester, urged us to do, make sure it's always about the business, get a business sponsor, so that from the very get-go, before you make any decisions, that the business sponsor can, instead of having somebody in IT speak for the business sponsor, he's going to know whether or not he's going to want to use this. In-Q-Tel was a fairly small company. We had a total of 70 employees, and I worked closely, directly with the CEO a guy named Gilman Louie, who was the first CEO of In-Q-Tel, and he wanted to see actually mobile business intelligence. In those days, he carried a BlackBerry, which was in 2000 through 2006. Certainly in the early 2000s, it was a little bit less common than it has become. And he wanted to be able to just look, send a message to somebody or to something and get all the information that we have about a company while he's out in the field, which is where he was at least half the time. That guy, the executive or woman, is going to be able to tell you what they want and where they're going to adopt it. And then since we can deploy now on mobile, we don't have to wait for them to sit at their desk and run through it and see whether or not they'll use it, along with whatever else they use their workstation for, which is mostly email as far as I can tell. But don't spend a lot of time, don't be too enamored by this technology and all of the things that you can do, like I showed you in that original dashboard. And then don't take too long. Between conception and delivery, it needs to be a matter of a short number of months, not a month, a half a year or a year. That's what happens. Time gets warped. And here's where the use of a product, and I'm not selling a product, not anymore anyway, rather than just a consultant that could deliver 90% of what you want to do, or have a company like the Binocle that I'm not associated with. I'm not getting anything out of this, but they are able to produce something like that in 2 weeks. So the question is just what? What's the data? How did they get the data? So I got some of these ideas from that link. You can go to that link for more. Getting BI right is a subset of getting the business right. Getting your IT strategy aligned with your business. Don't miss what's next in either technology or the business. And what's next is clearly mobile. Actually, I have some stats, I think, on a future slide on how that's happening and why there's such a huge disruption at the very top in Microsoft. It started when Sanofi left. I was also a Microsoft employee. And he was responsible for Office 2007, love it or hate it, but he did get that out. And then he was given the job of rescuing Windows from the Vista fiasco, and he did that. And then he produced Windows 8. And he was gone practically the next day, and now Ballmer's stepping down. What's happening? Now, the other thing that I learned, actually back when I did that system for the Department of Revenue, and I did a system for a company called ZEP, which produces chemicals. They basically produce the stuff that gets your hands dirty, and then they produce the soap so you can wash it off. Again, in their case, it was 90-10. 10% of their customers produced 90% of their revenue, not their profit. They were responsible for the company. So start with the assumption that you're going to use Pareto when you're looking at the data. You're not going to look at all the data. You're going to look at the data that's important. And again, that business sponsor can tell you. In a lot of businesses, certainly pharmaceuticals and cosmetics, but in an awful lot of businesses, even in ZEP, which is a commodity chemical company, just a small number of products and a small number of customers accounted for almost everything. And then a few statistics in the data, even in the 20%, are enough to really tell you what is going on. And when you need to downsize it to fit on a mobile screen, that's even more important. Strategy consulting as well as government intelligence, two areas that I've done consulting. Some of those companies, what they were looking for was not what, they were looking for who. When they were doing searches that were related to information, so for example, taking a strategy consulting example, we have a potential client who wants us to do business process reengineering. Rather than my putting that together, because I don't know that much about it, I also don't want to learn about it before we do the proposal. I want to find out who did it already and then put them in front of the customer. How do I find that quickly? And that was a very, very difficult problem to solve for a number of reasons, not least of which in both cases they kept a lot of information private to siloed organizations. And so how do you get a sanitized version of that information available to the entire organization so that you can find people? So what was urgently needed typically was, who's the expert in this area? And that was the focus of the the search systems that we put in some of those companies. At In-Q-Tel, a lot of our investment in the early days was skewed towards this. So some of these companies, Endeca, and they've since been acquired. I believe Endeca was acquired by Oracle. Spotfire was acquired by TIBCO. Stratify, Iron Mountain. There's a prompt there. They helped in search, and that was ultimately the target of the search. Search through all the documents on the system, our system, to find out who are the people that we really want to get in touch with. So I'm claiming that mobile BI is really the next new thing, as is mobile IT in general. They already use them, and they actually like it in most cases that I've been exposed to. So you need to get the right data there, and you need to keep track of that bring your own device universe as well. Media tablets, bring your own technology at work. Here's just a sample of all the different forms that can come in. Media tablet, this is the stat I was referring to earlier. Windows 8 will likely fall to third place behind Android and Apple. This is just from Gartner's last year's 10 key trends. And they're saying by 2015, and I think that, if anything, from a year ago, that pace has been accelerated. That bring your own device has been the norm. People coming in, especially the current generation coming out of college and graduate school. Again, the statistic, Windows 8 will find itself in third place beyond Android and Apple. Third place. Windows, Microsoft. But these are, on the positive side, these are platforms that BI was made for, or they were made for BI. If you're going to deploy to mobile BI in today's bring your own device world, you need to have mobile platform management. That's another consideration. And then you need all these various mobile platform managers themselves to be managed, and with a single management interface. And that's a kind of BI across your mobile universe, especially for the hybrid BYOD universe. So that's one last thought on this cautionary to leave you with, which is this is all evolving as we speak. So I think that leaves us about almost a little more than 15 minutes for questions if you want to open it up. Adam? Adam, are you there?
Lou, we having some technical issues?
Oh. Yeah.
Nope.
I was.
Yep.
No, not as far as I know.
Okay. All right. So I guess we'll open it up for questions. Okay, sounds good. All right. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to type them into the Q&A box on the bottom of the screen in the right-hand corner, and Lou will answer your questions. just wait for some people to ask some questions. Don't be shy. Lou is eager to answer your questions.
Was the presentation visible the whole time?
It was, yes.
Oh.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll just wait a few more seconds to see if anybody has any questions.
And like I said, you can either make a request to Adam in MS Dynamics World or directly to me through my Exodus email address, and I can send you a copy of the presentation, which has several links in it to more information available, publicly available.
Okay. All right. All right, well, it doesn't look like we have any questions, so why don't we wrap up. Lou, thanks so much again for your time.
Sure.
Great presentation. Yeah, I really appreciate it. And once again, everyone, thank you so much for attending, and please keep your eyes open for more BI and reporting strategies sessions to come in the next few months. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you, Adam.